It is 4:30 a.m. In your house there are no windows, floor is a packed dirt, and sleeping just a few feet from your bed is a cow. It wasn't an alarm that woke you. It was the biting cold and the stinging smoke from a dying hearth. Welcome to your reality. You are a peasant in 14th century Europe, and you've just begun the longest day of your life. When we talk about the Middle Ages, most of the attention usually goes to kings, wars, and the people who made decisions. But for the vast majority of the population, medieval life was something much simpler and much harder. Most people were peasants. They lived in small rural communities, worked land they didn't own, and spent most of their lives doing the same kinds of tasks over and over again. Very few of them ever traveled far from where they were born, and almost none of them left behind anything written in their own words. So rather than looking at another famous event or ruler, this is going to be a look at something far more ordinary. A single day. The kind of day that would have been repeated hundreds, even thousands of times over the course of a lifetime. We'll follow a peasant from the moment they wake up in the early morning, through a full day of work, and finally back home again as daylight fades. Along the way, we'll look at what they ate, where they lived, how the work was organized, and how much time, if any, was left for rest. It's not dramatic and it's not exceptional, but it was normal. And because it was normal, it mattered. The day usually starts early, often before sunrise, not because anyone wants it to, but because there's simply too much to do. There are no clocks, of course, and no real way of measuring time beyond the light coming in through the doorway or the sound of movement outside. In summer, that means waking very early. In winter, it means waking in the dark and getting on with it anyway. A peasant's home is small, usually a single room shared by the entire family. There's a hearth in the middle, but no chimney as we'd recognize one, so smoke tends to linger inside. The walls are made of wood, wattle and daub, or whatever materials are available locally, and the floor is just packed earth. It's not unusual for animals to be kept inside as well, especially in colder months, because livestock is valuable and warmth is limited. Sleeping arrangements are basic. Straw mattresses, rough blankets, sometimes shared between several people. Privacy isn't really a concept here. Neither is comfort, at least not in the modern sense. If the night was cold, damp or noisy, then that's simply how the morning begins. Getting up isn't a slow process. Once awake, the day more or less starts immediately. The fire may need to be coaxed back to life from embers left overnight, assuming it wasn't allowed to go out completely. Someone fetches water. Someone checks on the animals. Children are awake as well, because they'll be working too, as soon as they're old enough to be useful. This is the point at which the day's work is already taking shape. What needs doing depends on the time of year, the weather, and the demands placed on the household by the local lord. There's very little flexibility. Tasks missed today will simply make tomorrow harder. By the time the sun is properly up, the household is already moving and the working day has begun. There isn't really a clear idea of breakfast in the way we'd understand it today. What food is eaten in the morning depends almost entirely on what's available and how much work lies ahead. For most peasants, the first meal of the day is simple, repetitive, and meant to keep them going rather than to be enjoyed. Bread is central. Dark, dense bread made from rye, barley, or a mix of grains, often coarse and heavy. White bread made from fine wheat flour exists, but it's usually reserved for the wealthy. For peasants, bread is filling, durable, and reliable, which matters more than taste. It's often stale, sometimes several days old, but that's not unusual and not especially remarked upon. Alongside the bread, there is usually pottage. This is a thick, slow-cooked mixture made in a single pot, using whatever ingredients are on hand. Vegetables like onions, leeks, cabbage, peas, or beans go in, along with grains or oats. Meat is rare, and when it does appear, it's often in very small amounts. more for flavor than substance. The same pot may be kept going for days, with new ingredients added as the old are eaten. The meal is eaten quickly. There's no table as such, no cutlery beyond wooden spoons, and no real separation between eating and working. Food is fuel, enough to stop hunger from becoming a distraction, but rarely enough to feel full for long. Drink is usually ale, even in the morning. Not because people are drinking to excess, but because clean water isn't always reliable. Ale is weak, brewed locally, and safer to consume. Children drink it too, though often in a watered-down form. Once the food is gone, that's it. There's no second helping waiting, and no guarantee of more later if the day goes badly. The meal is finished, tools are gathered, and attention turns fully to the work ahead. By the time the morning meal is over, the peasant isn't well fed, just fed enough, and that's all that's expected. By mid-morning, the work is fully underway. What that work looks like depends almost entirely on the season. In spring, there's plowing and sowing. In summer, there's maintenance and tending. And in autumn, everything revolves around the harvest. Winter doesn't mean rest either, just different tasks, repairing tools, clearing land, hauling wood, or caring for animals. Most of the labor is done by hand, using simple tools that haven't changed much for generations. Wooden plows tipped with iron, sickles, hoes, spades. They're heavy, awkward and slow, and they demand constant physical effort. Progress is measured in small gains: a strip of field cleared, a row planted, a bundle of grain cut and tied. This isn't work done alone. Fields are worked communally. Families labor together, and neighbors rely on one another, especially during planting and harvest. At the same time, much of this labor isn't for the peasant's own benefit. Several days a week may be owed to the local lord, working his land instead of their own. These obligations aren't optional, and failing to meet them can bring fines or punishment. Children work as well. As soon as they're able to carry, gather, scare birds from crops, or tend animals, they're expected to contribute. There's no clear divide between childhood and adulthood here. If you can help, you do. The pace is steady and unforgiving. There's no real sense of pushing through to finish early, because the work doesn't end. It simply pauses when light fades or when the body can't go on. Injuries are common, exhaustion is constant, and there's little room for slowing down. A missed task now can mean less food later, and that's a risk few can afford. As the morning wears on, the body settles into the rhythm of labor. Muscles ache, hands blister, backs stiffen, but the work continues because it has to. By the time the sun reaches its height, a great deal of effort has already been spent, and there's still most of the day to get through. Around the middle of the day, there may be a pause, but calling it a break would be generous. How long it lasts, or whether it happens at all, depends on the work, the weather, and how much still needs to be done. During harvest time especially, stopping for long simply isn't an option. If there is food, it's similar to what was eaten earlier. More bread, more pottage, perhaps cold leftovers carried out to the fields. Nothing is cooked specially for this moment. The fire is back at the house, and time away from work is kept to a minimum. People eat where they are, sitting on the ground, leaning against tools, or standing if there's nowhere else. Conversation is limited and practical. Everyone knows the work isn't finished, and the sooner the food is gone, the sooner things move again. This short pause is often the only chance to catch a breath, stretch sore muscles, or tend to minor injuries. A cut might be wrapped in cloth, a blister ignored, a cramp worked through. There's no expectation of recovery, just endurance. If the weather turns, rain or heat, the day adjusts around it rather than stopping. Work continues unless conditions make it impossible, and even then the delay just pushes the burden forward. Before long, tools are back in hand. The midday moment passes quickly, and the afternoon stretches ahead, long and demanding, with no real change in pace. The afternoon is often the hardest part of the day. The initial energy of the morning is gone, and whatever food was eaten earlier has long since been used up. What's left is the slow grind of continuing the same work with a tired body. Tasks don't change much as the hours pass. Fields still need tending, bundles still need carrying, animals still need watching. The repetition wears people down. Backs ache, shoulders stiffen, and hands lose feeling. There's no real option to stop. Work is only done when it's done, or when the light starts to fail. The afternoon is also when worry sets in. A poor patch of soil, damaged crops, or changing weather can't be ignored. These things directly affect how much food will be available in the months ahead. A bad harvest doesn't mean inconvenience, it means hunger. As the sun begins to lower, shadows stretch across the fields. The pace may ease slightly, not out of mercy, but because exhaustion forces it. Still, the work continues until there's little choice but to stop. By the time the day finally begins to wind down, most of the effort has already been spent. What remains is the walk home and whatever strength is left for the evening. As the light starts to fade, work in the fields comes to an end, not because everything is finished, but because it can't continue. Tools are gathered, animals are herded back, and people begin the slow walk home. The pace is unhurried, mostly because there's very little energy left to move any faster. Home offers shelter, but not much comfort. The house is still dark, still smoky, and still crowded. The fire is lit again if there's fuel to spare, and the space around it quickly becomes the center of activity. Clothes are damp or dirty, bodies are sore, and everything smells of earth and smoke. The evening meal is much like the rest. Bread and pottage again, perhaps warmed if the fire is going. If anything extra has been gathered during the day, wild greens, a handful of berries, maybe a bit of cheese, it's added in. Nothing is wasted and portions are small. What matters is stretching supplies, not satisfying hunger. While food is prepared or eaten, there are other tasks to deal with. Tools need repairing, animals checking, grain sorting, or small household jobs that couldn't be done earlier. Children help where they can, or simply sit nearby, exhausted like everyone else. Conversation is quiet and practical. There's little to discuss beyond what needs doing tomorrow or what went wrong today. Stories and songs do exist, but they tend to surface on better nights or on special occasions. Most evenings end early, simply because there's nothing left in the body to give. As darkness settles in, the fire burns low. The day's work is over, but the next one is already waiting. Leisure does exist in a peasant's life, but it's limited and carefully defined. Free time isn't something taken whenever it's wanted. It's tied to the calendar, mostly to religious observance, and allowed rather than expected. The church shapes the rhythm of the year. Sundays and feast days offer a break from regular labor, at least in theory. Attendance at church isn't optional, but it does bring people together, and for many, it's the only time they regularly leave their immediate surroundings. Sermons are long, the buildings are cold, but the gathering itself matters. Festivals stand out because they break the routine. On certain holy days, work stops or slows, and villages come alive in ways they normally don't. There's music, dancing, games, and more food than usual, though still not in great abundance. Ale flows more freely, brewed locally and shared communally. These moments don't last long. A single day, sometimes only an afternoon, before life returns to normal. But they matter because they offer something different, a chance to forget aching muscles and constant worry, even if only briefly. Social bonds are reinforced here. Marriages are celebrated, disputes are aired or settled, news is exchanged. For a short time, the pressure eases. Then the festival ends, the church doors close, and everyone returns to their fields and homes. Leisure in the Middle Ages isn't about relaxation. It's about interruption. A pause in the rhythm, rare enough that it's noticed when it happens. Once night fully sets in, there's very little left to do. Light is expensive, and candles or oil lamps are used sparingly, if at all. Most of the house is lit only by the fire, and when that dies down, darkness takes over quickly. People prepare for sleep much as they did the night before. Straw is straightened, blankets are shared, and everyone settles wherever there is space. The air is heavy with smoke and the smell of damp wood. Outside, animals shift and make noise, and the village never becomes completely silent. Sleep isn't especially deep or comfortable. Cold, hunger, coughing, and the simple hardness of the floor or bedding make sure of that. And even in rest, there's a sense of uncertainty. A sudden illness, a fire, bad weather, or trouble from outside the village can undo everything very quickly. Tomorrow's work is already assumed. There's no real sense of planning beyond the immediate future, because most things are out of anyone's control. The best that can be hoped for is that morning comes and the body is still capable of working when it does. Eventually, exhaustion takes over. The fire fades, the house goes dark, and the day ends. For a medieval peasant, this day isn't unusual. It isn't especially hard, and it isn't especially easy. It's simply normal. The same pattern repeats itself again and again, shaped by the seasons, the land, and the demands placed on those who work it. Years pass like this. Childhood blends into adulthood, and adulthood into old age, if someone is lucky enough to reach it. Change happens slowly, if it happens at all, and most lives never stray far from where they began. The next morning will look much the same house, the same fields, the same work waiting to be done. And for millions of people across the medieval world, that was life. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, there will be more stories like this on the channel. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.